Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Ryan Alshak, CEO and founder of Laurel, a Gen AI time platform that's raised $55.7 million in funding. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Brett.
Super excited to have you here. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Talk to us about what you're building there at Laurel.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we are a Gen AI time platform. So what does that mean? We are applying Gen AI to automate timesheets for professional service firms. So think enterprise law, accounting, and consulting firms, with the idea that right now a professional has to tell a machine what they did at work. And our vision of the world is the machine should be reminding the human what they did at work. From a value prop perspective, very straightforward. The buyer, which is the firm, will see their profit increase anywhere between 4 and 11%. This is because we are ensuring that all of the time work gets billed, and then as much of the time billed gets paid. And then on the user side, they are saving on average 1 hour a week in the act of actually keeping time. And then the vision of the business is to take that time data that we are generating and allow any enterprise organization to understand where their people's time is being spent. And the use case that I'm most passionate about is how do we, as a Gen AI time company, measure the efficacy of Gen AI tooling? And I think it's a piece that is not being talked enough about. There's millions and millions of enterprise dollars being deployed at these LLMs, but there's no real sort of measure of how do you know that this is a good ROI. And so we want Laurel's data to be able to tell enterprises exactly how much time they're saving from Gen AI tooling.
Now, can you take us back to 2016 and the founding of the company? What were you doing before this? And what was the big aha that made you say, yep, that's it. I'm going to go build this company for the next 5, 10, 15 years of my life?
Yeah. So I was a lawyer and, well, multiple sort of pieces here. Number one, as a lawyer, I did not feel like I was adding value. I felt like I was redistributing value. And that was sort of antithetical to who I wanted to be. And so I was always thinking about how do I create an idea that would sort of lead to a business. So that was always in the back of my mind. And with that, I realized very quickly that the part of being a lawyer that was not only time consuming, but dehumanizing was having to keep track of my work in 6-minute increments. And with the best analog being, if I am a chef on a busy Saturday night, and while I am cooking for 500 patrons, I'm asked to track every ingredient that I'm using, that would be a very frustrating and distracting workflow. And so I was sitting there one day and I had the aha moment of, again, why am I telling a machine what I did at work when everything that I'm doing has a digital trace, and really the machine should be reminding me? And so that made me appreciate that, one, the future of time would be done with that paradigm. And then the counterintuitive insight that I researched was that lawyers, accountants, consultants, we actually underbill because we forget a lot of the work that we did. And so if I can make a buyer more profit and I could save a user time, that would be a very good ingredient to building a company.
How can anyone say no? This sounds like a no-brainer.
You know, that there's no such thing as a no-brainer, unfortunately. And so there are 3 reasons why people say no. One is, and I think this will be very useful for the audience, at the end of the day, the trope of nobody gets fired for buying IBM still holds very true. And so as a startup that wants to compete in the enterprise, you have to earn the trust of the market. And a lot of enterprises don't want to be early in the Moore's chasm of being with you on that journey. And so there's always a fear of lack of social proof when you are in your earlier stages. The second is right now, IT teams are so overburdened with the amount of projects that they can take on. And so you're competing for limited IT bandwidth. It's actually more difficult to get IT resources than it is budget right now. And so you have to constantly ensure that your platform is being prioritized across the 1,000 other things an enterprise could be doing. And then the third is change management in the enterprise is very real, especially if you are rolling out to end users. And so you can imagine if I created a self-driving car with no steering wheel, that would be a pretty scary thing the first time you jumped into that car. And that is what we are doing, right? We are telling people you no longer have to put your hand on the wheel. I'll trust the Waymo to sort of drive itself.
That hits. I just converted to using Waymo as my default. If I'm going to use an Uber now, I use Waymo instead as of like the last 2 weeks in San Francisco. So I like that. That makes a lot of sense.
It's in a day and age where everything is so over amplified, ChatGPT hitting 100 million users faster than any software ever, with the littlest thing creating the biggest noise, all this founder mode nonsense on Twitter last week. I find that the experience of a Waymo to be so underappreciated, undercovered. It is one of the more magical user experiences I think that we've had in the last few decades. And I think it's not something people are talking enough about.
Every time I get in one, and I probably ride in one like 10 or 15 times a week now, like just getting around an SF, like it's way easier than driving. It is the magical feeling. Like I feel like I'm in the future. Like it feels like this is what we were promised, like 10 or 20 years ago. Like it just feels futuristic and I'm not bored of it yet. Every time I get in one, like I'm giddy with excitement about the idea of being in a car that's driving itself.
I could not agree more.
Now, what's it like as a user? So can you kind of paint a picture for us of, what that looks like? Do they have to interact with this tool at all? What does that interaction level look like for users?
Absolutely. So there are 4 key components to automating a timesheet end to end. It turns out it's a very complicated and wide surface area product. The first component is we need to track the digital footprint of our users, which means if we're getting a digital program to work, we have to be right there in that program to be able to pull that work data. So that's step 1. Step 2 is then applying AI to that digital footprint to approximate how a human thinks. And the AI applications that we have we are clustering the data. We are assigning the data to the relevant client and matter. We are using Gen AI to create a description of that work. And then we're using machine learning to codify that work. The third piece is then a lawyer, CPA, or consultant is met with a draft timesheet. And then the end user goes ahead and finalizes that timesheet. So they are able to add, they are able to delete, they are able to edit. The beauty there is the human in the loop is always making the AI smarter and smarter every time you interact with the software. But there absolutely is a human in the loop in this process. And then as soon as the user finalizes their timesheet, we then have an integration of the firm's billing system. So all the back office admin works exactly the same way. So we are a GUI for our user. They finalize a timesheet, but instead of having to build their time, they're reviewing their time, and then they go ahead and push it into the billing system to get paid by their end client.
What's the status quo right now? Is there like an old Salesforce type company that's just been doing this for law firms for the last like 20 or 30 years and you're disrupting them? Or like, what is the status quo?
Yes, there is an incumbent in the market. It's a public company. I think it would be overly generous to call them the Salesforce of our space, but it is fundamentally a manual timekeeping experience. They have tried to integrate automation into their platform with very little success. Their automation platform has less than 15% adoption across its user base. And so we are fundamentally competing with a manual workflow.
How do you convince lawyers to change? So I think behavior change is always very difficult to do, especially for those lawyers and just anyone who's been doing something, a certain way. Change is hard. How are you getting people to change?
Yeah, it's the most important question. Lawyers, CPAs, consultants, these are not generally the first movers on enterprise technology. And so what I tell every prospect is as difficult as building the technology is change management. And if you aren't as focused on it as you are building the platform, you will fail. And so one of the most humbling lessons is we had a very convicted opinion of how time should be done. And we tried to initially force people into that workflow, which is relying on the AI and automation. And I should say we've been building AI long before the Overton window of ChatGPT. So this is a technology that we've been debugging for many years. What we learned is it was very important that we don't force any user into our version of the world, but rather we met them where they are. And so right now, the platform is able to accommodate 4 distinctive workflows of keeping time. You can rely on the AI and automation. You can build time manually. You can use timers, or you can delegate the workflow of timekeeping altogether to an assistant and will assist our users on any path that you take. And so that was a very key learning from a change management perspective, which is to say, hey, however you want to keep time, we are going to help you keep time faster, better, and more compliant.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. One thing that I've seen in other industries is, kind of this post-Chat GPT world. When did it come out? Like November 22, I think it was. That spawned a whole lot of new startups and new competition. Are you seeing more competition now, leveraging AI, trying to solve similar problems?
Absolutely. I'll say a few pieces on that front. So specific to my business, there are definitely Gen AI time players that have come up. I think Laurel actually inspired them, which is a huge, what should I say? It's a badge of honor. And so I think anytime you are a truly category creating founder and you inspire others to build a competitive business, you should view that as a huge compliment, not a threat. That said, there is so much around the AI that you have to build in order to compete in our industry. You cannot emphasize enough how important user experience is around the AI from a first principles approach. In fact, I think this is why incumbents will not win the AI race, because they're trying to jam Gen AI into legacy UX. And I think that will fail spectacularly. The second is there is a lot of non-AI that you have to build to automate a timesheet. As I mentioned, you have to be integrated into every platform that a user is using to create work. You have to build billing integrations into on-prem SQL databases. And so there is a lot around the AI that you must build. And then if you're playing in the enterprise, there's a whole host of IT and finance features to administer the product that is all below the line, but are table stakes to actually being able to be purchased. And then on a more macro sense, I do believe that ideas are the cheapest they've ever been. Building POCs of those ideas are the cheapest it's ever been. And so companies that are built with purpose and built with mission and have a story will find their competitive advantage. And so I actually strongly believe marketing, so long as it's authentic, will be a bigger competitive differentiator than a technology moat, which I would not have said even 2 years ago.
Where did you learn how to be an effective storyteller? Did that come from being a lawyer? I feel like as a lawyer, that it's all about storytelling, right?
That would be a good retcon version of the story. But I think the truth is I'm first generation. My parents are Syrian Lebanese. And I think in the Middle Eastern culture, telling stories is how you communicate. And less important than sort of the brass facts is the framing of the story. And sitting around, whether it's tea, coffee, a hookah, and sort of regaling your friends and family with stories that are always a little bit embellished, I think is embedded in the culture. And I think that is how I grew up. And I think really that is what made me into what I believe to be an effective storyteller.
Has your family accepted that you left behind being a lawyer to be a founder? The reason I ask, I've had a number of other founders on who have immigrant parents and they were doctors and they left that career to go found companies, and the companies are wildly successful. And they all joke that their families still just are kind of waiting for the day that they're going to stop this whole entrepreneurship thing and go back to practicing medicine. Has it been similar for you at all?
So it's not a joke. I'll tell you the truth. So funny enough, both my parents were doctors. And growing up, my dad said, Ryan, Habibi, you could be whatever you want to be. I am not like those other dads. You could be a cardiologist, a neurologist, a radiologist, a dermatologist. I don't care, man. And so you can imagine there was a change management curve when it came to saying, hey, I'm going to go into law, which was very disappointing for them. And then as soon as they accepted that law was a decent enough profession, and then I got what we call a big law job, and I was off the proverbial payroll, I then 2 years later told them that I was giving that all up to start this journey. And so there was a whole other sort of version of it. But in all seriousness, my parents gave me the most important gift any parent can give their child, which is unwavering and authentic belief that their child could do anything they want to do. And I think they always knew that I was destined to pave my own path, that I was not like most people. And they have been so incredibly supportive. And actually, my mom in particular really became my purpose in terms of building the company, because our mission is to return time. And I learned that lesson when I moved back home to take care of her for a year and a half, as her brain tumor ended up coming back with a vengeance. And I learned through that experience that when you appreciate that time is finite, do you appreciate that it is all that matters? And there is so much that we do as humans that wastes time. And I realized that I want to spend the rest of my life ensuring that people are able to spend their time with intention and with leverage.
That's incredible. And that makes a lot more sense now of what you were just talking about earlier about this being a very mission focused company. So the mission isn't to make law firms more productive and more money in the end. It's to really give people back their time.
It is built on the statistic that the average knowledge worker works 9 hours a day, but only adds leverage for 3. And so I think of the business in 3 distinct phases to return those 6 hours back to the world. Phase 1 is proving the thesis that a machine can more effectively and accurately keep time versus a human. And then from a go-to-market strategy, we decided to go after industries where you have to build time to make money. Why? It's an existing workflow. It's a high promoting pressure to do the workflow. You have to keep time to keep your job. And it's a very demonstrable ROI when you automate it. That is phase 1. Phase 2 is then to take the data generated from machine first time and enable these industries to stop billing time and start billing outcomes. I'm a big Charlie Munger, show me the incentive, I'll show you the behavior. And I believe that we can rewire 20% of US GDP and get them to stop manufacturing activities and start manufacturing efficient outcomes. And then phase 3 of the business is to say, even in an outcome-based world, you need to understand the input of time to ask yourself the question, am I spending my time with leverage? And so that really is the company roadmap for us to be able to return those 6 hours back to every knowledge worker.
Amazing. I love that. Let's talk about marketing a little bit. And of course, we'll link to it in the show notes. But I have to say, the website's beautiful. The branding's beautiful. I think you don't get this way on accident. So I'm sure there was a lot of intention and a lot of thinking into the brand. Can you talk to us about that and kind of take us behind the scenes?
Sure. So we actually rebranded back in 2022, and we did so for a very specific reason. We had built a V1 platform, and the company was called Ping. And after raising the Series B, I realized that I had overfitted that platform for legal, and I needed a more flexible and configurable platform in order to achieve the vision that we just talked about. And so we started building the V2 platform, which, by the way, everyone told us, you never rebuild, always iterate. But we decided to sort of buck conventional wisdom there. And we launched that V2 platform in Q1 of last year and renamed the company Laurel to signify the new platform. In many ways, it is a brand new company. It is a brand new culture. It is a brand new core value. And Laurel was a very specific decision, which is I wanted a name that was one that felt timeless. I didn't want a startup-y name. I wanted something that felt like it had been built in the 1600s, 2000s, 2400s. Number 2 is I wanted a name that emoted this idea that we should all feel so much praise and achievement when we look at our time. That is a ledger of our value. And Laurel was in Grecian times, they would give the laurel wreath to signify achievement in poetry and sports. And when we look at a timesheet, we should not feel dread or we should not feel profundity around it. We should feel pride. And I wanted the timesheet to be a wreath to say, wow, look at all I did today. I'm very proud of that. And then the last one is a more sort of esoteric, but I wanted a name that had the first and last letter be the same to signify this idea that time is a loop. And when you really are in your zone of genius, or for me, when I was with mom at the end, time can feel infinite. And that is the beauty of time. It is as much perception as it is physics. And so, yeah, that was the story behind the brand. And I really obviously will continue improving on it, but I'm very happy with how it came out.
I figured there had to be a good story there. I would have been really disappointed if you're like, oh yeah, that was my dog back in college. So just added the name there.
Well, that's very insulting to my dog who, really, no, I'm just, yeah, it was very intentional in terms of how we chose that name.
In terms of the go-to-market team, what does that team look like and how are you going to market?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we took a nonlinear path to get here. And so I had the V1 platform. was able to raise a $36 million Series B with the traction that we had on it, and then made the very unconventional and perhaps unpopular decision to effectively start over. Because I felt like anchoring from a first principles of what is going to allow us to achieve the mission, that was the only decision to be made. And so in many ways, we had to reset a lot of what we did internally at the organization, including go to market. And so we went back to founder-led sales. And I'm very excited to say that we launched in Q1 of last year. And by the end of this year, we'll be well over 10 million ARR. And that will all be done founder-led. And so right now, the team is myself, my co-founder, and Lisa and Sabrina, who are Renaissance reps in sort of the most spectacular way and are true 0 to 1 sellers, which I cannot tell you how difficult it is to find. And we have been a very small but mighty team. And I think what founder-led sales allows you to do is learn from the market and be able to directly pipe that into the product roadmap and create a feedback loop that no other sort of company can compete with. And so what I would really recommend, and A16 has a good article here called Market Annealing. And one of the key takeaways is founders undersell how far they could take the company in a founder-led motion. And oftentimes you could take it to that 8-figure ARR mark. And I'd really recommend anyone listening that at the end of the day, as a founder, your job is to sell and it's to learn. And the best way to do that is to be on the front lines doing it yourself.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
As you reflect on that milestone, what do you think you've gotten right? How did you achieve 10 million plus in ARR?
So much of it is market timing, which is unfortunately, it's hard to act on that, but that is the truth. And so while we're rebuilding the platform, everything was happening with Gen AI at the same time. And not only did it allow us to, from our first principles, build an AI platform in the way that we wanted to take advantage of what was happening, but it also woke up our market to AI. As you can imagine, I was selling AI back in 2018 and 2019 to law firms and accounting firms, and they looked at me as if I had 14 heads. They're like, we're not convinced cloud is the future. I don't know what AI is. And then as soon as the ChatGPT moment hit, all of a sudden firms were coming to us and saying, hey, I'm now feeling pressure to deploy AI. Like, can you help me? Can we do this? And so a lot of it is just right place, right time. The other piece of it is, again, I had an unfair advantage here where I made a lot of mistakes. I made a lot of successes in V1. And I had a unique opportunity to a second bite of the apple of answering the question, if I could do it all over again, what would I do? And so I did that. And so I created a highly configurable platform that allowed us to iterate wildly quickly. It allowed us to experiment with AI models and be able to create a learning engine that didn't matter whether we were right or wrong, but that we can course correct faster than any of our competitors. And so when you are building that 0 to 10 platform, your job is to be wrong as cheap and as fast as possible. And so we had the platform to support the learning engine that we needed to make. And then the last thing that I'll say from a go-to-market lens is we are lucky in that our ROI is very clear and demonstrable. In fact, our ROI methodology has now been audited and confirmed by a Big Four firm. And we know exactly how much money we are making for our buyers. Yes, we are saving users time, but that is not what we sell. We sell money. And at the end of the day, you want to own the value chain of your clients. And time is what a professional service firm sells. It is how they make money. And the better that we automate that workflow, the more money we make our firms and create really nice incentive alignment. And so that really resonated as the economy started to get a little bit tighter. When you're selling money in a tight economy, you're going to cut through a lot of the noise.
What I like about your approach is, it's true. You are selling that back to them. What I've seen, and just on LinkedIn, a lot of people are always joking around how everyone selling any product shifted their message to be about, generate revenue. And I think the one I saw people kind of poking fun at was Calendly, that they were talking about revenue was like their core message. And everyone's like, you kind of impact revenue, but it's really just making our lives easier. You're in a totally different case. You really are selling time and selling money.
Our average lawyer and CPA today bill 25 minutes more per day. Their average billing rate for our lawyers and CPAs are $375 an hour. And so it is very easy to understand the value that the software provides.
As you think about going from 10 to 20 million here, what's top of mind? What's maybe keeping you up at night, or, what's kind of top of mind, I guess, thinking about achieving that next big milestone?
Yeah, because insane, I want to get to 25 by end of next year. And so reverse engineering how we're going to do that. The number one thing on my mind is marketing, which is how do we get our story out in the world? And how do we differentiate based on not only the ROI that we are delivering, but also the purpose of why we're here? People buy people as much as they buy software. And so our new head of marketing starts Monday, which I'm very excited about. And I'm excited to amplify our story in a very big way. Number two is, as an enterprise sale, we have the challenge, which of course is the opportunity, where our buyer is not our user. And so I believe in a bottoms up marketing motion where lawyers and CPAs and consultants who list time tracking as the number one complaint of the job, for them to then go to their CFOs, CIOs, CEOs and say, we need to apply Gen AI to this workflow. And so we're thinking a lot about not only how do we market to our buyers, but how do we market to our users to influence our buyers. And then the third thing is, as I mentioned, we are aggressively expanding the AE team right now, but finding the right people and the right profile is a very difficult job. Early stage selling is a different sport than late stage selling. And so finding people that really thrive in ambiguity, thrive in having to do everything themselves with not much cross-functional support, thrive in having to discover and iterate on everything from pricing to security to legal. That is a very unique archetype. We are so lucky with Lisa and Sabrina that we found two that are world-class. And so our job is how do we find more Lisas and Sabrinas to join the team?
Let's talk a little bit about funding here as we move to close out the conversation. As I mentioned there in the intro, you've raised over 55 million to date. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this entire journey?
One of the themes here is story, and you need to be able to paint a vision that is not only big, but achievable. And so often founders will paint a vision or they'll paint a ladder, but you got to be able to do both. And so the number one most critical part of fundraising is, how do I show people that my vision of the world is not only going to change it, but it is inevitable? That is point one. Point two then is, great, given that inevitability, why should an investor believe that I am the one to do it? Because at the end of the day, as we talked about earlier, no idea is sacred, no idea is unique. And so if they believe that someone's going to win the race, why are they going to bet on this horse? So that is you, the founding team, et cetera. And then part three of fundraising is that it is no different than selling. It is no different than recruiting. It is a process. And in a process, the number one thing you need is leverage. And so your job is to get to that first term sheet as fast as possible while having a pipeline that is active. So you can go back to that pipeline. You could say, hey, this is what I have. I want to work with you. How do we make that happen? And so if you are able to do those three things, then you are able to be a successful fundraiser.
Final question for you, and I think this aligns perfectly with what you're just talking about there, the story of the future. Can you paint a picture for us? What's the company going to look like 10 years from today?
My hope is two things. Number one, from a pragmatic sense, I hope that Laurel is responsible from eliminating Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 from the English language. I believe that the future of the world looks like humans working 3 to 4 hours a day and adding 2 to 3x value of what we're doing today. I believe that AI is the next industrial revolution. And I believe that the working model will fundamentally change. People will work 50% less and produce 2 to 300% more.
Amazing. Love the vision. All right, we're going to wrap here. Before we do, if there's any founders who are listening in, they feel inspired, they want to follow along with this journey to 25 mil, where should we send them?
You can find me on Twitter at Ryan Alshak, or you can email me at ryan@laurel.ai, especially if you would like to join the company, because we are hiring across every single role. And I need phenomenal people to join our mission to come help me execute.
I love it. Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Brett.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.